Hello, 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 New Haven. We are grooving to the music here. This is I would be remiss if I didn't say we're listening to Tabisa, who is a wonderful New Haven artist, and we're so lucky to have her here. This is Arts Respond, a collaboration of WNHH Community Radio and the Arts Council of Greater New Haven. And today, I'm very excited to have a full house. To me, it feels like a full house because often it's one-on-one. I have Adrienne Jefferson, who is the Director of Cultural Affairs for the City of New Haven, Ming Thompson of Atelier Cho Thompson, and Winter Willoughby and Yi Kinzu Zhao, I'm very sorry, of the Design Brigade. So they are members of the Design Brigade, and they are also artists in their own right. And I'm really excited to have everyone here. So the very first thing that we'll do is tell listeners, so if folks maybe haven't heard the term Design Brigade, which was a project of the City of New Haven last year, what is it? What is a Design Brigadier?
I'll take that one, Lucy, just to speak overall. Last summer, as COVID was ravaging New Haven, I got together with a friend, Dana Karwas, who's the director of Center for Collaborative Arts and Media at Yale. And we were talking about how all around us, our friends, our community partners had these incredible design problems that were related to COVID. So I'm an architect and a designer. And on the other hand, I happened to know, and Dana knew, all these brilliant students who wanted to be solving problems in the world and who also were facing a world that was totally shutting down for the summer. No summer internships, no place for them to get experience in the world. So we thought maybe we can be a connector between these two groups. So we found a group of tremendous students of about 20 students, and 3 different projects and 3 different clients for them to work on. One of them was working with arts institutions like Next Haven, Yale Center for British Art, the Beinecke Library, Yale University Art Gallery, to connect them to students, young kids who didn't have school, and how to get their programming out into the world. The second project was working with the Towers, people living in a managed care facility, older folks who couldn't get out, couldn't have family visits, and were really isolated and suffering from, loneliness, boredom, things that happen to a lot of people. And then the third project, the one we're talking about today, Adrienne generously offered to be the client to explore a memorial for COVID. People have passed away, people have gotten sick, people have lost jobs. How do we move through this experience and create a new vision for what a memorial could be? And that's where maybe I'll hand over to Winter or Yi to talk about what they did last summer through their research and design.
Yeah, please, Winter, Yi, both at once, just hop in.
Sure. I'll also ask you to jump in on this because I was there for half of the program before returning for this diary disc project. But it was multiple months of in-depth community research. We reached out to dozens of community members, partners, organizations, really trying to understand the stories that needed to be told and we're trying to be told during this time, and understanding what was really needed for the people of New Haven. And so the brief kind of shifted a bit. We went in thinking it was going to be one thing, and after extensive research we discovered that people were actually desiring a space to heal and to kind of collectively come together and reflect. So that was, the main mission of our Design Brigade group. And that has continued obviously into this project. And that was, the main premise and driver of the temporary project. But maybe Yi, because you were able to see it through until the end, you can talk more about the long-term vision we have with the memorial project.
Yeah, I can sort of speak a little bit about the arc of student engagement. A lot of us were artists, feeling the anxiety of the pandemic right off the bat. We couldn't, as an artist, I couldn't go to the studios. So, and there's architects, there's undergraduate and graduate students in our group. It was a flexible group. I think it was started at 4, and then 2 more graduate architecture students were added. And at first, we wanted to just design off the bat. And then we spent about, I would say, like 3/4 of the time interviewing people, realizing that it's just too close to home. It's a bit of a, it's a very traumatic experience, and people don't want to see any sort of concrete design or a memorial as we think of what a memorial could be, right? Like a sculpture or something that references something that's ongoing now. So a lot of people that we spoke to, the community members, they want their own say in the projects, and B, want to be in community and in communication with each other, since we all felt really separated. And that's sort of how phase 1 and phase 2 came about. So phase 1, which is happening now, there's many iterations, and we continued speaking to community leaders and members pretty much up until the final version of the design. And phase 1 is just to acknowledge the pandemic is ongoing, and to acknowledge that there's different ways we can communicate and be in community, and to also sort of gather more voices and learn more about how people are feeling, and learn more about how people want to actually memorialize this experience. And phase 2, which is a much longer memorial, so the plans as of now, and it's very much subject to change, is to first develop a memorial committee, which allows for residents and community leaders to have decision-making power and a voice in the making of this longer-term memorial. And as of now, it is a revitalization of an art park. And we're looking into how these plans can develop, and looking into grants funding, and different ways to get this project off the ground, different ways to form the committee, so that the Department of Cultural Affairs, community members, and designers can sort of be in conversation.
Mm. And so before we go forward with that and talking about the Diary Disc project, which is something that New Haveners are going to, they haven't already seen them popping up around the city. They're going to start seeing them pop up around the city. But Adrian, I want to loop you in and ask a question that maybe to some listeners seems obvious, seems like a duh, but why was it really important to take the time and space to say, let's think about a memorial to this pandemic?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Well, the community said that this is what they wanted. So that's where it really began, and where the partnership between the city and the design brigade and Ming and her design firm began. Because we, during the pandemic, as we all know, a lot of people were hurting. And the city created an initiative called Together New Haven. And so Together New Haven was the economic, and it still is, the economic and recovery response to the pandemic. And so we had different committees and different things that we had to put together in order to help mitigate the damage. And one thing that came up was the need for community well-being during this entire time, centering people, even as we're talking about like economic development, which is, my department is housed under economic development. When we're looking into the exacerbation and the hotspots of what was happening in the community, and also the social unrest that was also happening right during that time, with the murders of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, and need I go on, we saw just this intense emotion from people, anger and hurt and pain, and the need to express themselves, but also just feeling like we need to be centering as a city well-being and focusing on that in everything that we do. So with that said, I chaired a committee called the Community Wellbeing Committee, which actually Ming was on as well. And during that conversation, most of the people who were on the committee were residents of the city. All people were residents, but most of them were from the hot spots that were being hit the hardest, Black and Brown communities, where we were just asking, like, what do you think we need to do moving forward? And we heard a number of different things like, equitable distribution of marketing and materials and making sure information, at that time it was COVID-19 testing. People weren't, getting information on where to get tested and all of these different things, making sure that information got out. But another thing that came up that became central was the idea of a COVID-19 memorial. So it just so happened that that conversation came up. And when it came up, Ming said, well, we should really talk and the city should come on as a partner because I'm working with the Design Brigade, who has also been having these conversations around a memorial. And so it made sense for us all to partner and work together. But I think, yeah, it is very obvious, why this is needed. People really want to express the unprecedented time that they have been through, and they want to be heard. They don't want to be told how a memorial should work. I want to add in that this has been led 100% really by the people, because the Design Brigade has listened. I mean, just been so responsive. The community engagement that they took part in has really been intensive community engagement in many of the hotspot areas of New Haven. So it's being led by the people, and we are just responding to what they say they need and they want.
And Winter and Yi, I would love to hear from you about some of what you were hearing. So I did run into probably one of your colleagues, maybe it was even one of you. I can't remember time at this point, but on Juneteenth, there was a wonderful teach-in last year in East Rock Park, led largely by New Haven's youth and members of Citywide Youth Coalition, which is a wonderful grassroots group here. But I know that there were some members of Design Brigade just collecting ideas at that point. And so I'm really interested in knowing some of the things that you were hearing from folks as you were going out into the community and collecting ideas.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go for it. I can start off. Some of the most profound conversations I felt was with Hanifa Washington of One Village Healing. And that really changed the direction of how I thought about this project. And some lines that really stuck by me, and this is from last year. We spoke to her again this year, but the line that really stuck by me is when people are hurting, and there's different ways of healing, but sometimes like having emptiness or having nothingness to direct someone is actually a generous way to engage and heal. So that was really profound for me to think about in terms of a memorial, because when we think about memorials, it's always an additive. There's always a way to like spin their perspective or try to elicit some sort of emotion or compassion, but actually allowing people to express themselves is a way of thinking about memorial I didn't think about. So that's one thing that stuck by me. And I have many more examples, but I would love to hear Winter's first.
Yeah, it was interesting because we we had these large they were like these wooden boards and post-it notes, and we really had no idea if we were going to get any responses, and it was just amazing to see. Like, I want to say we had 100 post-it notes covering those boards by the end of the day, and we actually documented every single one of them. Like, we have a digital copy of every single post-it note, so we wanted to just make sure everything was preserved and archived for this very reason, so we know how to direct these kinds of projects and initiatives. And actually our long-term memorial idea came from some of the scribbles and comments on the post-it notes. Some people actually suggested a park where there is art, and it's a place for artists, and it's something that is maintained and sustained by the city and communities. A lot of people wrote about wanting green spaces and also places where they can go for resources, for access to things. And a lot of people were also talking more conceptually about having a platform to share their stories and to share their voices, which at the time they didn't feel like were being heard. So we also took those comments to heart. in trying to design, what does this platform look like? And also a lot of people were asking for spaces to reflect and spaces to heal. So everything that we've been doing all comes from those three wooden boards on Juneteenth, of course, in addition to all of our other research, but that was the most compelling feedback I think we got from communities and people in New Haven.
And I want to hop into the Diary Disc project, which people are going to see popping up around their neighborhoods if they've not already seen that. But Ming, I also saw you nodding, and I want to make sure that you're able to hop in if you would like to.
No, I think everything the students have said.
Okay.
I do want to mention we have probably like 100 project partners, but one of the most continuous project partners has been the Connecticut Mental Health Foundation.
Yes.
And themes of wellness and mental health come up repeatedly. We're all facing a very trying time now. And I think what Yi just said about giving people emptiness will lead into this description of the diary disc. And I think also the idea of us all being so isolated from each other now in the pandemic, but also living in a really segregated city, in a city with a lot of complex problems. Getting people together in conversations and going from isolation to community or isolation to communication was one of the themes through the project. And I think that really strongly drove the students' design for the diary disc.
Yeah. So let's talk about the discs themselves. I was lucky enough to see one a week ago. Was it only a week ago? It feels like 5 weeks ago at this point, at the Bradley Street Bicycle Co-op, where there was a wonderful mural painting going up. So I would love to hear about the different locations where these will be, and then how folks can interact with them.
So I can answer that, but I also want to backtrack a bit to like what Ming was saying is kind of like the basis for this project. People have been experiencing the pandemic alone, but also collectively. We've been missing physical experiences, in particular, missing that feeling of belonging to our communities. And that is actually a human necessity, that feeling of belonging to, something greater, to a group of people. So we looked into shared experience, and that's really what drove the Diary Disc project. When people share that mental space with each other, sharing their stories, sharing their feelings, their experiences, well-being is actually amplified. And that is what creates this kind of healing space. So for the diary discs, we wanted to kind of harness that power of shared experience to create that collective healing space. So also what you were saying about that kind of emptiness, the look of the discs is inspired by time portals. They're quite boundless and large, but there's something really inviting about that. It's like kind of like a blank canvas. And as you have seen, each disc has a unique prompt on it. They range from aspirational prompts like I hope, I imagine, I dream, to reflective prompts like I miss, I remember. And that's really important because the pandemic's not over, and everyone handles the pandemic differently and heals differently. So that was really important. When we gave each disc to the community partners, we asked them to choose the prompt that fit their community the best. And we wanted them to really make this disc their own. It's not something where we're inviting people, out of their communities to come to something. It's really hosted by the community and, for their people. And people are asked to draw and write their responses onto the disc as it relates to the pandemic in paint pens, which I think you saw at the Bradley Street Co-op. But yeah, so I just wanted to kind of cover the basis of the project. But yeah, it's been rolling out this week. You can go onto our website, it's diarydiscs.com, and there is a whole list of events, upcoming events throughout New Haven this week until the Arts Festival. second week in June, I believe, where all of the discs will be presented across the New Haven Green for everyone to experience together.
And I'd
Can I
also
really quick just add in,
yes, please.
as Winter was talking, I just wanted to emphasize how much the Design Brigade, again, I said it earlier, they really have centered community voice. I mean, so much to the point where the project, as Yi explained earlier, has evolved over time. But in particular, these renderings, these renditions of these discs, it started off as an idea around a community diary disc, which I really don't even remember how we got to that or how that even came up in conversation. But it was supposed to be a diary, right? And then we were gonna do, it wasn't prompts originally until they spoke to Hanifa from One Village Healing and other community partners, and then changed, like evolved the project pertaining to community feedback. And I just wanna express how much I think this is a wonderful model to follow when you are working in tandem with community, in solidarity with community, and sharing space and sharing power. This is just, I wanna give them kudos and make sure that people hear me giving them kudos. It's a really great model and it's a job well done.
Yeah, thank you, Adrian. Yeah, so one of the things from last summer that is so important is that not only is it important to create a space for people to voice themselves, but it's actually very important to have people have decision-making power. And that's how this project is going to continue to progress with the Diary Disc project, but also moving forward is having the communities decide how they want to speak or when, or just being able to hold that space is super important. And then go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
I was gonna just go back and answer the question of who our community partners are. And we have, so the project scope has changed. We were originally going to do 12, but I believe we have 11 discs now. And so far, Bradley Street Bike Co-op has a disc. The Pilgrim Congregational Church at Fairhaven Heights has a disc. The Yale School of Medicine, we wanted to hear the voices of healthcare workers and how they're impacted. They have a disc, and then we have a few discs going out today. It went out today, right, Ming? So could you speak of those?
Yeah, today we delivered to City Seed, who's a market tomorrow morning at Conte West School, so in Worcester Square Farmers Market tomorrow morning. We delivered to Next Haven, where we're collaborating with their apprenticeship program for New Haven high school students, who are an incredible group of young artists. And they've been thinking a lot about imagining in the future, so this plugged well into their curriculum. We also delivered one to the Canal Dock Boathouse on Long Wharf for the New Haven Symphony Orchestra's performance of The Four Seasons by Vivaldi, featuring 4 New Haven community poets. And that's going to be an amazing event that starts this weekend, and we'll have the discs out next weekend on the 28th and 30th. And then on Monday, we're rolling out 4 discs at New Haven public libraries across the city. So there'll be one at Ives Main Library. There'll be one at Mitchell, one at Wilson Branch Library, and one at Fairhaven Library. And did I cover them all? And we have, and I want to mention also, so the students designed these beautiful black portals. They look like portal to another dimension, and they're floating on a base. Each disc is 6 feet in diameter, which of course alludes to the 6 feet distance that we've been from each other, but now it's 6 feet of being together. Yeah. And 10 of these discs are designed to be written on. So we provide markers, QR codes, so you can learn more about the project, and it's a big blank canvas for people to write on. But the 11th disc is a little bit different, and I want to hand over to Winter to talk about the 11th disc.
The 11th disc is really special. We wanted to create a disc to really capture New Haven's connection, to other cities. So, this is a situation that is not just unique to New Haven. This is something that's happening nationally. This is something that's happening globally, and not a lot of people are comfortable getting to events. Not a lot of people can reach these discs. So we wanted to create one that would kind of transcend all of these boundaries, but still be able to connect people under our kind of project mission and values. So we created a contactless disc. It's a physical disc. It looks like all of the rest of them. However, it doesn't have a specific prompt on it. And it's intentionally blank. People do not write on it. And instead, what they do is they go to our website. There'll be like a QR code like on the base. And we're actually talking to Yale New Haven Hospital right now. And they're very excited about hosting this digital disc. And the idea is that people go onto our website. There's this digital disc form. People choose the prompt that they want to respond to, and they share their stories online through this form. Once they submit it, the disc will actually glow, which is just a really amazing concept because it's kind of symbolic of presence and empathy, especially throughout, the hospital system, doctors that are rushing by, or patients or families of patients who are, in the vicinity of the disc. Once they see that disc glow, they'll know that someone in the world, someone in the hospital, someone in New Haven just shared their empathy, shared their story with them. And you don't even need to see that story to kind of like feel that kind of presence. And it's something that I envisioned very early on because, with everything happening digitally, it was one of our kind of major questions we were trying to answer during the first half of Design Brigade. Everything's happening online. People are mourning over Zoom, like losing people over FaceTime. And I really wanted to find a way that we can kind of bridge the physical and the digital in a meaningful way. And working with an awesome group of student developers, we created this disc, and it works. And we're so excited to see that launch in the next few weeks.
Before we go to the next question, I just want to thank Adrienne Jefferson so much for her time. Adrienne is the city's director of cultural affairs, and she is hopping off because she is a very busy person. So Adrienne, thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for the time today. Bye,
y'all. To remind listeners, this is Arts Respond with WNHH Community Radio and the Arts Council of Greater New Haven. And today we are talking about the Diary Disc Project. Winter and Yi, I wanted to ask both of you two questions about the specific moment that it comes in. And I think the first is, how or in what ways has this changed since you have started it? Because the pandemic, you're absolutely right, is in no way over. We're at a very different point than we were a year ago. And yet there is some hope glimmering, I think, at the end of a very, very long tunnel. There are also still people losing their lives. And I will say this interview comes during an exceptionally hard and sad week for New Haven, during which we have buried a very young firefighter, and during which I believe 3, if not over 3 people have been killed by gun violence in 5 days, 2 of whom were under 21. So I guess I'd like to know from you in what ways this has evolved as COVID has sort of been this moving target.
I can start first. I would say that when we came to this project, we had no expectations. The original prompt was to create a memorial for those affected by COVID-19 through the lens of social justice, and that's verbatim. That was like the prop. And from there, we didn't have an expectation for it to continue or not continue. We just wanted to tackle this first by hearing the voices of the community. So it's been evolving since the very beginning. The thing that hasn't really changed is the locations that we selected for where diary discs go. And we want to have a broad spectrum of voices, but also definitely getting the locations that were hit hardest, like Fairhaven or the Hill. So those are the things that haven't changed. But in terms of designs, it's been constantly up until even like the final iteration before we sent it to the fabricators. We're changing based on feedback and discussion.
At the beginning, just to add on, of Design Brigade and throughout Design Brigade, I think we were really focused on trying to find, one kind of installation, one structure, one solution to all of these. I think we called it, the pluralities of this moment. I mean, there's just so many things that were happening over the summer. And I think the biggest way it's changed, at least to me, is that we discovered there was an urgency. Like we couldn't wait, 5 years to, go through funding and approvals and, for something large and grand scale, as amazing as that is, we realized there was an urgency for something immediate and something now, and how do we work with communities? How do we work with, the short budget that we had? How can we really make it special with what we have, that just as powerfully responds to that brief, which is obviously has been changing every day, every week. But I think that was the biggest change. We really realized that we needed to focus on the now and something that can just start being like this model for other communities and other cities. And something that I remember that happened during Juneteenth, actually, a young woman came up to me and she just loved what we were doing with the blackboards and just seeing all of these people with the colorful Post-it notes. People were talking, people were surrounding these boards from all over New Haven, talking about, what was needed for New Haven and their experiences. And she loved it. And she wasn't from New Haven. And she even asked us, can I bring these boards to my community? Because I want to do this for them. And we painted, wooden boards and brought Post-it notes and Sharpies, yet that is enough, to engage with the community and really start that discussion. So I think that was a tipping point for us. And that is quite literally how the diary disc started. Those blackboards, we were going to create, large chalkboards around New Haven where people could, respond with, chalk to different questions. And that was our initial concept, came out of that very, very day, that survey method. Now they've turned into discs, but it really all just came from that moment where we realized we needed to do something sooner and quickly.
And then I always want to interrogate the use of the word community, because I feel like it has become such a buzzword. And so how also, and Winter, you talked a little bit about this, especially with having discs that live literally in different spaces, so physical spaces and digital space. But how is the project ensuring that community members aren't left out and voices are not left out?
So one thing I think about is the idea of community, but also the idea of being in community. So one of the things that's really profound for me with this experience is just listening and hearing from people who I otherwise wouldn't listen or hear, because I just don't have a contact or a mode or a platform to have this type of listening and engagement. So that's one thing I think about when I think about community. And you're right, it's interesting when there's either a city project or a school project to think about community engagement as like a mode or something to check off. You're like, oh yeah, we spoke to these communities, or yes, their voices are heard. But I think, but like, again, for me, being in community is important. Like people can be in community, but also having decision-making power, which is something that we go back to since the beginning, ensures that that the people who interact with these discs are interacting in a very intentional way.
That's also something we were thinking about with the digital disc as well. That is something that can technically exist for as long as we want it to. And we're in the process of creating an interface for our website where you can actually see the responses that are being inputted. And we're still trying to figure out, what kind of details people can share if they want to. So something that was important to us was having different neighborhoods involved. And we were thinking that for this digital disc, people can indicate, where they're from, or, what they're a part of, or whatever it might be. So we can keep that going for anyone who wants to participate, because, this is not an exclusive situation. This is something that's been, happening everywhere.
Mhm.
Lucy, I also want to think a little bit about the kind of educational aim of Design Brigade. And we, many of the students were architects, but there's also artists. He was a psychology major, musician.
No, Winter was a psychology major.
He's very much.
He's an artist. Winter's a psych major. And in design school, New Haven trained some of the most talented designers in the world who are going to go all over the world. Some of us stay in New Haven. And the model of education in design school is that you often do projects in communities around the world, but rarely do you actually talk to people in those communities. And that's always been a really crazy thing for me, that, students in design school might be designing a house in Mumbai, but like you don't go and talk to the people that might live in that house. You might talk to one or two people there, but that's about it. And one of the tenets of Design Brigade was that a designer's first job is to listen. And that it can be really hard. Listening and actually hearing what people are saying can be really difficult. And I think this group in particular, dealing with a very complex summer, just defining what the word memorial means. We got into some very painful, very emotional conversations internally and externally. And I think often a designer's first instinct, like you said, is to just start making something. But instead of doing 10% listening, 90% making, I think we inverted that. And I'm hoping that for the students that we worked with and for the partners, the partners might see that design has power and that good design is for everyone. Good design doesn't have to be expensive. Good design just needs to be thoughtful, and that it might open up a world of opportunity to get good design out into the world, I guess. And then for the students also to have an experience, a difficult experience, I think, of what design with community means, not just design for community. And that's something I struggle with in my work every day, and that I'm hoping we've created a cohort of students who are going to go out into the world and use that lesson in the work they do in their future career.
Yeah, and I mean, actually, Winter and Yi, I would love to know from both of you, because Ming, you're absolutely right. And I was actually thinking about that. So Juneteenth the celebrations were Friday, June 19th last year. And then of course on June 24th, the Christopher Columbus monument in Worcester Square came down. It was about a 10-hour process that went from 5 a.m. to 3 or 4 p.m. in the afternoon. And as someone who was there for the whole time, it was an extremely traumatic day. In every way, like emotionally and physically traumatic. And so I'm wondering for both of you, holding this project, do you see it as part of a shift that you are a part of? Because I think there is a shifting dialogue around what monuments and memorials are and can be in this country, but also kind of what you want to will into existence.
Yeah, definitely. I want to actually just reiterate what Adrian Jefferson said earlier about how this project is really just driven by New Haven residents. Like, we did not have any expectations. I'm not even sure if Adrian had expectations of where this project could go. Had there not been so much backing from community partners, like, this project wouldn't go anywhere. So and we do believe we have a very unique way of creating a memorial. I don't believe I've seen yet if there were memorials created in this type of way, in gathering. I mean, memorials do gather and interview victims of certain crimes, but this is a very large scope for a city memorial, and trying to reach as many community leaders and partners and residents as possible. I believe it's a pretty unique way of coming up with a memorial for, with phase one, as a way to continue our engagement and the continuum of an ongoing pandemic, to acknowledge that. But it's also a way to sort of get people to know that this future long-term one can be happening, and you can be engaged, and here is how you can be. And we're still planning these things, but it's I believe it's quite unique to really try to get the entire city on board for this.
Winter, did you want to hop in?
I want to echo everything that you said. Something else that I was thinking about is how, when Ming was speaking, that for the first, I want to say 2 months, which was almost the entirety of what Design Brigade was, supposed to be originally in terms of its timeline. As a team, I think there was 5 of us on the memory team, or maybe it was more. We had spent every single week writing, I want to say 1,000 words on what we were doing as a group and what we were doing to change. And we were confronting, like Ming said, what we're taught in design school, what we're taught is, normal for, these projects. You have a client and, you do it according to their, wants and needs, and then you build it and you move on. And for this, it's just, you can't follow the traditional process. You can't follow the traditional model. And as a team, we really had to internally come together and reflect and change some things that have been like deeply rooted in our, personal processes for art, design, everything. And the Medium articles, I actually still reference our Medium articles. Like in my work, I'll actually go back to different weeks to see how we address different problems. And you'll see over the course of the however many weeks, how it really shifted, but it was always really in depth and very thoughtful. But we spent more time probably doing that than designing for the first few months, because that was really important that we understood all of those nuances and changes.
And I don't want to air anyone's dirty laundry, but I would love to, Ming, I would love to hear about some of those difficult conversations in the last, 10 to 12 minutes that we have, because I think it's important for folks to hear. I mean, nothing that, you don't want to talk about, obviously. But I think the issue that you mentioned is really rampant in not only design, and like universities and institutions of higher education, but also in the nonprofit industrial complex, which is robust in New Haven.
Yeah, I think one of the first things that we grappled with, and the summer, things changed a lot between March and July in this country. When the students came on board the project, like in May, conversations nationally shifted to issues of social justice and racial justice within a few weeks, and rapidly changed the course of this project. I think, as Yi mentioned, we set out with a kind of social justice lens in mind, but the inequalities of the pandemic and the inequalities of day-to-day life in America really kind of refocused this project. I think grappling with our own identities, and that's something that I think we, as a designer, I'm not professionally trained to talk about any of those issues, but we very quickly confronted situations where, as a group, and I wasn't a student in the group, I was kind of hearing this from outside, as an outside mentor to you, grappling with our own identities. I think what we should have done and what we'll do better next time is at the beginning, thinking about who we are and where we come from. You know, I'm a mixed race person from small town Appalachia, and I bring certain viewpoints with me. And I think especially because, you know, the students on Design Brigade are or were part of Yale. And there's a lot of baggage that they maybe didn't even know they were confronting around Yale, around centuries of Yale New Haven relationships. So I think the second big issue I think is the Yale, being part of Yale, and what does that mean? I went to Yale as an undergrad. I lived away for a long time and I came back. And when I came back, someone mentioned to me, you know, Yale doesn't even know it's in Connecticut. Yale thinks it's like a free floating entity, like out in the universe. But it is a place grounded in a city. It is a place grounded in a state. And there were a lot of complex political and social issues that students had to confront really quickly that came with being from Yale. And I remember there were some uncomfortable community meetings in front of large public audiences where the students had to confront their own racial identity, their own existence as Yale students and what that means. And I think there are no solutions to that, but I think understanding that history better and understanding what they were walking into in these conversations is really important. And there's, they can't change being Yale students. That they are who they are. And I think bringing people into the conversation, as we've talked about a lot, was kind of the first step to rethinking their position and maybe letting them look at their institution that they were a part of in a slightly different way than they had before. And that's that's a huge struggle. And Yale's been a great partner in a lot of ways to this project, but they weren't the main partner, and they were one of many, many, many partners on the project.
Yeah, Winter and Yi, feel free to hop in our last about 8 minutes together.
Yeah, I would say that one of the things that came up, and I echo everything that Ming just said, was that we're working with the city to come up with a design for the city, but yet the people who are sort of designing this don't reflect or look like the people who it's being, who's going to be experiencing this. And how do we change that? And that came up again and again. And that led to a lot of internal decision making as to how this is going to move forward. And including for the long-term memorial, as I mentioned earlier, the creation of a committee that will actually, people have voiced, not only do we want to have a voice, but we actually need decision-making power, because otherwise, the project may not be respected by the city. It's not enough to just plop something on just because you spoke to a few people. And it's really, it's really sobering, and I would like to welcome more of these conversations as we're speaking to community members, to just say, straight, flat out, like, before we even get to design, before you even ask me for my labor, like, what am I contributing to? Am I contributing to sort of the repetition of what has been happening with Yale New Haven already, or is there something fundamental that has to change before I actually contribute to this, right?
Yeah, so with everything that's been said, it was a really hard with those Medium articles and those internal conversations that we had to have. We talked a lot about trust and what that means, and that's how we dug deeper and had to look into our identities and our backgrounds, and kind of as a group start making these kinds of shifts and realizations. And with that, I think creating that committee was it's just such a great, I don't know if it's the best solution, but I think it's needed. We couldn't find, a board of people from around New Haven besides, the city, besides the government, who could, make these decisions and could have a voice, or could at least represent voices that didn't have a platform. So I think the committee I hope that is something that we can really make happen this summer and put into effect, because wonderful things will happen with that committee.
Yeah, and one other thing we recognized was that we do have to step down as soon as we get a foundational structure where this can sort of move on its own and has its own funding. Like, we need to step down, and we can aid as designers and other, just as in the diary disc, we listen and we aid as designers, but the decision and how the memorial is going to affect the city has to be made by New Haveners.
Yeah. So just in our last minute, Winter, I know you already said, you can go to our website and find, but I want I almost said readers. I want listeners to know how to find you. So if you could repeat that information, so folks think, I want to get involved in this project, especially I want to go and find one of these discs in my neighborhood. How can they do that?
So as I mentioned a bit earlier, right now, the best way to find all of this information is our website, which is diarydiscs.com. And there you'll find all of our community partners, all of our project sponsors, team members, every event that is upcoming, the location, the times. We also will be posting images from each event in the past. So if you miss any of it, you still get to see it on our site, and something that we're going to just keep updating. So just keep an eye out on the website for upcoming events.
And we also have an Instagram handle at Diary Disc. So if you see a diary disc and you want to photograph it, you could tag us, you can hashtag it, and then we'll share it in stories.
Yes, amazing. And so I want to thank all of you. I also want to thank Harry Droz, who is the man behind the controls, making everything happen. Harry had this radio station, which usually lives in physical space, like up and running online within, I think, 5 days of the pandemic hitting. And so I can't thank him enough for his work. So thank all of you, and Harry, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
This is Harry Droz, and you're listening to WMHHLP 103.5 FM New Haven.